Today you're going to be on a fun ride of multiple things, so if you haven't already been amazed.
Today, we're pulling the curtain back and taking you inside the Woodland Park Zoo.
Tian and Zan are way up in the tree. A bit shy, but we'll take you up there.
New exhibits. New animals.
Who do we have there?
And new adventures await right now on Cairo 7.
Hello and welcome inside the Woodland Park Zoo. I'm your host, Matthew Smith, and today we're going to introduce you to wolves. Now, we are here, but we're talking about coexistence, and not just wolves. From the smallest bee to the most colorful butterfly, we'll explore the crucial role we can all play in helping pollinators thrive. Plus, we'll head to the marsh to check in on our western pond turtles, who've been given a second lease on life thanks to some conservation efforts right here inside the zoo. But first, as the population grows, it's inevitable that humans and wild animals will need to learn to coexist. And that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Here inside the zoo, a wolf may draw oohs and ahs, but out in the real world, a farmer, they're not happy when they see them near their crops. We're going to explore why compromise may be the only answer to coexisting with these wolves.
They're super shy. You're lucky to see a wolf in the wild.
In the wild, sure. But inside the zoo, if you listen closely and quietly enough, just under the nearby chatter of birds, that crunch, just right there, that is one of the three sisters. These wolves appear and then disappear.
They're way more alert and aware of us than we are of them.
As in spotting us before we spot them. As Kevin Murphy explains, ranchers who are dealing with the resurgence of wolves east of the Cascades, their frustration levels are growing. Because those wolves can come in conflict with their livestock. Take a look. This map is of where known packs can be found currently in Washington state. But there are goals to allow wolves to expand further into wild areas, including the southern Cascades.
I think that where we run into challenges is when it negatively impacts us as humans.
Because as beautiful as these wolves are, they are an apex predator, meaning livestock can look like a wolf snack. So why is the zoo, and the state for that matter, pushing to coexist with these wolves? To answer that, we have to take a peek at Yellowstone. Yes, the national park. Here, wolves hunt elk, which has an oversized effect, not just on animals, but this beautiful landscape you're looking at. It had basically disappeared before the wolves returned to these parts.
As soon as they reintroduce the wolves, they've really found this sort of trophic cascade of nature where the elk now are kept more in check population-wise. They move more because they have predators chasing them. And literally, even things like aspen trees and beavers have come back to Yellowstone since the wolf reintroduction. And they found even bird populations have increased because of all this new young tree habitat that has been allowed to regrow that the elk didn't browse down to a nub.
Paul Ehrlich, a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, once said, quote, "The rule of intelligent tinkering is to save all the parts." Sadly, we didn't think that way with wolves, both in Yellowstone and the Pacific Northwest, where they were killed by the thousands. We tried to reimagine nature without the wolf.
We paid bounties and basically hunted every wolf there was, except there was a few packs that moved back and forth in upper Michigan and Canada and Minnesota and Canada that were never completely extirpated, hunted down over several decades.
Lucky for us, some wolves survived. As we look at this trio, you have to wonder, if we can coexist with their wild cousins, we could save a species, but more importantly, we could save an entire ecosystem.
We're fortunate to have this huge amount of wilderness and wild space very close to humans. So we have this area that's suitable for so many species that could never live other places in the U.S. Species like cougars and black bears, even potentially grizzly bears, wolves, wolverines.
And along Woodland Park Zoo's Living Northwest Trail, you can see many of these animals, as well as river otters like this fella feeding on a salmon in plain sight. Our wolf and elk friends are always visible, as are mountain goats. And the crowd favorite, well, that's behind Dr. Long here, Kima, a brown bear born all the way back in '94. In the wild, wolves aren't the only change our state is seeing. Fishers like this one have been reintroduced. Another species that was hunted down by us to exportation or local extinction. Wolverines are a similar story. In recent years, trap camera images from local researchers, as you see Dr. Long installing here, well, they showcase how wolverines are returning to lands that they once historically lived in.
It's not like we're trying to recreate a pristine wilderness. What we're trying to do is make sure that all the pieces of the ecosystem are here and functioning, because what we found and what researchers have found whenever they look closely at systems is that all the parts, or most of the parts, play a role.
On a personal level, do you worry, or do you find things encouraging at this stage?
I think two places that I still really feel like we need to make sure we're tuning into and keeping up with. One is climate change, of course, and making sure that we're continuing to protect connected networks of land so that animals can respond to climate change, because they're going to have to. The other is that there still are places where humans are having an effect on nature that can be really problematic.
Yeah. We continue to stress animals, whether through industry spewing pollution that warms a fragile habitat, fueling a growing wildfire season, or even the way we build roads, cutting off habitat. The animals have proven resilient as they return to their native lands here in the Pacific Northwest, but it will rely on us if they survive. That key word Dr. Long loves to mention, coexistence, is the key here.
I think that's the most important thing. These things can't occur separately. If we want to recover and have a functional mountain, forest, sea ecosystem here in Washington, people need to be part of the equation.
But before we can think about the long-term effects here, addressing the now matters too. Are people willing to coexist? Especially when it comes to those front lines where wolves are returning.
But our role is kind of getting the message out and working with the state to work with communities and try and help socialize the idea. It's complicated, it's not simple.
I gotta imagine that there's high emotions from all sides when it comes to an issue like this.
You bet. And has been for a long time, really.
Is it ever kind of like you're looking around thinking, we actually got here where this is a real discussion?
Yeah, and I think what all folks need to understand that it is complicated. When you live in an area that's heavy with large carnivores, it can challenge your personal life, and so that challenges your political views and your philosophies.
Coexistence. That is the message that the zoo loves to get across, and that is why the ambassador animals are so important. Speaking of important, I was just checking out these western pond turtles. They were nearly wiped out just about 30 years ago, so the zoo had to step in. Coming up, we'll show you the work that they've been up to.
Coming up, we'll go inside the lab and out to the marsh.
Well, we work really hard to keep these turtles as wild and as resilient as possible.
As we highlight two critically important conservation efforts happening at the zoo.
Here we go, one more turtle back into their natural habitat.
So stick with us, because we'll be swimming with these freshwater turtles next.
Cairo 7 Cares is here to help those who need it most.
By supporting local nonprofits and events to help give more people access to basic needs.
Let's work together to make a difference right here in Western Washington. Cairo 7 Cares.
That little fella there is a western pond turtle. Welcome back inside Woodland Park Zoo, by the way. Hey, we are inside this pond turtle lab because decades ago there was only about 150 of these fellows left in the wild. Now the work they're doing inside these tubs, inside the zoo, it's been going on for 30 years, and it's changing everything. Let's take a look at how they're celebrating the anniversary. Watching a turtle swim in this small pond in Lakewood, Washington, or taking in these four basking in the sun, it may seem normal enough to the untrained eye. Not long ago, sights like these didn't seem possible.
There are continually evolving challenges, but we continually address those challenges.
As Kevin Murphy explains it, there were only about 150 of these western pond turtles when the state and Woodland Park Zoo teamed up to stop them from going extinct.
I'm a big believer in every cog in the wheel makes a difference. And so this turtle is a major cleanup artist in our wetlands.
Which is why this work matters. As we've discussed with wolves and other apex predators today, there's a natural order in the wild. But even smaller creatures have a role to play. When we throw it off, ripple effects can cause major issues.
Sometimes it's hard to really articulate, what's the purpose of a turtle, but it's just a link in that living chain. And once you pull a link out, then something else either proliferates or something else suffers.
Needless to say, there's a lot of hope that these small hatchlings grow up to be adult turtles like this one, which is why I showed up to this year's special release, which also attracted politicians, researchers, and zoo donors alike. Everyone is here to see history. This marks 30 years of a program to Head Start turtles that will be released here in the Puget Sound and out near the Columbia River Gorge.
As a zookeeper, it's one of the most amazing privileges to be part of a program where you actually get to reintroduce animals back to the wild. So to be part of their care and then actually see them returning to their home is really an amazing experience.
Stephanie Miller is another member of the team rescuing these turtles. Now, it's a different program. A few animals that you see inside a zoo could survive in the wild, but these turtles are different. They're kept and raised wild. Eggs are harvested out in nature, raised in a lab, and eventually the hatchlings are transferred to these bigger outdoor tanks where we met up with Kevin.
They're pretty basic setups on the inside.
This is the final step before these tiny turtles are released in the wild. Here they eat natural food that they find for themselves inside the tanks. There's plenty of space for them to hide because in the wild, they're pretty secretive.
Oh, look at that. This one's D35.
Aside from health checks, they're rarely handled like this. They grow them here until they're large enough so they won't get picked off in the wild.
Primarily, the metric is for a bullfrog's mouth. The bullfrog can't stuff these guys this size into their mouths.
That may sound crazy, but yes, even turtles start small. Of course, there's other issues in the wild. Recently, workers have ID'd a fungus that, crudely put, can eat their shells, which is why the zoo has been studying the best way to raise these fellas to keep them safe. Which brings us back to this special event. This endangered western pond turtle now getting a second chance at life, rejoining those wild turtles.
Turtles are amazing. They've been on our planet for a long, long time, and they're uniquely equipped with both instinct and learning abilities so they can adapt to their habitats as long as we take care of those habitats. And that's something we're going to have to think about in our beautiful state of Washington.
Kind of hard to believe, but 30 years in the making at the zoo and Department of Fish and Wildlife, and here we go, one more turtle back into their natural habitat.
It's a pretty cool experience to take this
We'll take 59.
perfect little turtle that we've nurtured from an egg and actually physically let it go into a pond that's wild and watch them scoot away into the debris on the bottom. Is pretty cool.
The western pond turtle is not the only conservation effort here inside the Woodland Park Zoo. Just to my right here, we have hundreds of larvae of the silver spot butterfly. They are endangered in our area. And take a look here. We've got a little snack going on by one of the larvae. Now, in order to understand how they get here, you have to understand it takes a lot of time, months of work. Shelby Miller is going to explain all of that, how they get from here in the lab to outside.
So this is what we call, this is our overwintering container. And so this is just a mason jar with a Plex tube in it, like this, that has a piece of silk organza. And so as the butterfly is laying eggs, we collect the eggs and put them in a petri dish. And then as the eggs get close to hatching, we put in these little tiny corrugated cardboard pieces. And what the larva does, it will hatch and it will eat its egg case. And then it takes a big drink of water and it swells up. And then it starts to move its head back and forth looking for something. And we're pretty sure it's just looking, all they can see at that point is light and dark, so they don't have very good eyesight. But it heads directly towards the little caves that our piece of corrugated cardboard has made. And then they line themselves up. They put down a little bit of silk, poop once, and then go to sleep. And so we could easily fit about 10 or 15 little tiny first instar larvae on this yurt. And then we put water in this container and we put a lid on it and this goes into the refrigerator, and that's their home for like 8 months. When they first come out, they're in little tiny glass jars because they're so tiny, we want them to be able to find their food, and the shoe boxes are a little too big. So they start off in a small jar, and then they graduate to a little bit larger jar, and then once they're very big and mobile, then they go to the shoebox. Our horticulture department makes 2 early blue violet plants. That's their host plant. It's the only plant that these caterpillars eat. So our horticulture department makes about 3,000 plants for us for the lab. And we've been involved in this project for about 20 years. And we are often asked, why is a zoo in Washington involved in a project for a butterfly in Oregon? And the reason is because the butterfly was in Washington. It's where we want the butterfly to come back to. The butterfly is still here, and there was definitely a point in the population where the numbers dropped so low, it was worried that this butterfly wasn't going to be around at all. So our success is that at this point is we can say the butterfly is still here, and we still have an animal that we can work with, and we're not giving up hope. Hopefully at some point we'll be able to completely put ourselves out of work and say the butterfly's fine, doesn't need us, it's in Washington, it's flying, woohoo! You know, that's the hope.
As we continue to explore some of the smallest critters that live amongst us, it's important to take a second to talk about these. Not just bees, but pollinators. You may not know this, but about 1/3 of the food that we eat, it requires pollination. Puts things into perspective, doesn't it? So what can you do to help? We went over to the pollinator patio to figure that out. But before the break, time for your pollinator-related trivia question. True or false? Most species of bees don't sting. We'll have your answer when your look inside Woodland Park Zoo continues.
Cairo 7 Cares is here to help those who need it most.
By supporting local nonprofits and events to help give more people access to basic needs.
Let's work together to make a difference right here in Western Washington. Cairo 7 Cares.
Today you're going to be on a fun ride of multiple things, so if you haven't already been amazed.
Today, we're pulling the curtain back and taking you inside the Woodland Park Zoo.
Tian and Zan are way up in the tree. They're a bit shy, but we'll take you up there.
New exhibits. New animals.
Who do we have there?
And new adventures await right now on Cairo 7.
Now, we talked about some of the big species like wolves and some of the smaller ones like pond turtles and butterflies, but what about the things that go buzz in your backyard? Don't be too concerned because our next guest is going to talk a little bit about pollination. And if you love fruit in your backyard, you may actually like bees after all.
They're just trying to live their lives. They're not really out to sting us.
I mean, I'm getting up close and saying like, look at this bee, and it doesn't seem to care that I'm here.
It really is the wasps during barbecue season that just sort of cause pollinators to have a bad rap.
As Aaron Sullivan and I browse the Woodland Park Zoo's pollinator patio, we see all sorts of pollinators. A bumblebee on this coneflower, a fly on these daisies. And whether it's the artichoke or this globe thistle, the honeybees are all over. And Erin can't contain her excitement.
Huge, like I was saying with artichokes, thistles are a huge plant for pollinator plants. And so all of these are little, this is what I was saying about a composite. So this is a composite of, these are all little flowers here, but together it makes one big flower. And so the bees can land on it and just keep nectaring away. It's one-stop shopping. And so thistles are great for pollinators.
What's not? Poisons. Or how we bend nature to our will. These things can fuel a drop in our native bee populations.
It's oftentimes a lack of habitat. With a lot of development happening, they're losing habitat.
And those perfect manicured lawns so many of us covet?
Not good. No. Lawns are basically a pollinator desert. Unless there's some weeds in there, there's really nothing for them.
That's the envy of the neighborhood if you've got this, but in reality, we're not helping anyone.
No, and I think we can change that. And there's always room for compromise. Like if you need to have that lawn, then Maybe you have some container gardens out there with the lawn that have some pollinators in them. There's a lot of people that have condos or apartments or just don't have the option of a yard. Hanging baskets. Growing that one tomato plant on your deck is actually going to provide a little bit of food.
This is all so important. More important than you may think. Bees, after all, are not guaranteed to be here forever.
There's a bumblebee here in the Northwest that what we know has decreased in population. So it's super rare to see it, and I know they're considering listing it.
As in the endangered species list. Remember what Shelby taught us, those silver spot butterfly struggles? The idea of losing even more pollinators, well, that's not good for them or us.
Because it's a lot of work to get their populations back.
But do you think people realize that this is the type of stuff that we're in danger of losing?
I don't know if they do. I think that that's why I exist. That's why I like to think that my role is here, is to really help people see what's in their backyard, to see the diversity that's in their backyard, to understand it. That's a hoverfly.
Because Erin is a big believer that if you see the benefits, you won't be so afraid.
That fear easily goes into fascination.
Pollinators, after all, bring bigger blooms, bigger fruit.
That's what you want, is the big juicy raspberry. And so if that's what you want, let's help the animals that are trying to give that to us and give them a little bit of what they need.
And flowers, fruits, blooms, yes, it's all important, sure. And in the summer, a little water goes a long ways too. But some things are actually super easy.
I like to say that I'm a horrible gardener. In the fall, don't rake up all the leaves. Like, leave the leaf litter. Let a part of your yard stay a little bit messy. Bumblebees, like queen bumblebees, are going to find leaf litter to kind of nestle in. They're going to find a wood pile to kind of nestle in. And so just letting a part of the yard go to nature is going to let the bugs have a place to overwinter.
This is a great way to convince our neighbors that, hey, I don't have to mow. I don't have to fix up that spot.
I'm doing it for the pollinators.
Boy, these pollinators sure don't like to quit. And we've learned that that is a great thing, right? You know, it has been a pleasure to bring this season to you. It has been a roller coaster ride, but hopefully you stopped and smelled the daisies, if you will. Now, hopefully you also figured out what it's like to work here behind the scenes inside the Woodland Park Zoo. We showed you how to grow up gorilla, to spending a day in the life of a zookeeper and getting up close to better understand these incredible animals. Of course, if you missed an episode, you can always catch it anytime at Cairo7.com/zoo. And now, your answer to your final trivia question. True or false? Most species of bees don't sting. True. While all female bees are physically capable of stinging, most bee species native here in the States, they prefer to live a solitary life rather than that in colonies. So they don't sting you unless you're physically threatening them. The one exception, honeybees. I hate to say it, folks, but our time here inside the Woodland Park Zoo is done for now. I hope you enjoyed your look inside. Until next time, I'm Matthew Smith.